It's Trek time again. How did you all feel about this one? As per usual, I'm not looking at anyone else's reactions before constructing my own review thoughts, but I suspect that most Trek fans will rather enjoy this episode. I certainly did, for the most part. I also suspect the kinds of fake fans who bizarrely seem to claim they like Star Trek but keep missing the damn point of what Trek has been for nearly 6 decades now will be just a little bit pissy about a few things in this episode, and I think that's hilarious and also a bit sad. It's a weird balance between two extremes, a dichotomy if you will, which, as luck would have it, as if I'd planned it while feeling a bit self-satisfied about my own faux cleverness in constructing this intro, is kind of the whole point of this episode. Duality, binaries, conflict therein, and somewhat more specifically binaries, and how in the context of understanding one's self, they're kind of just constructs, not absolutes. It's an idea, not a rule. Hello again, I am Blunty, and episode 7 of Strange New Worlds is entitled The Serene Squall. And before we get started in earnest, where the hell is Hammer, by the way? I want more Goram Hammer. Bring me my smarmy Rias Hell engineer and bring me him now. Anyway, the episode title, The Serene Squall, is the name of an unaffiliated pirate ship around which the episode revolves. And as pirates, the ship's crew doesn't align itself with any constructed authority. And the name of the ship is a contradictory binary in itself, the word serene and the word squall being mutually exclusive concepts in their entirety. The captain of the ship, and as usual, if you're watching reviews like this before you watch the episode, you've given up all rights to whine about spoilers. That is your socially constructed required spoiler warning if you missed my point. But the captain of the ship, the Serene Squall, is also apparently non-binary, never expressly stated. They're not shoved down your throats like so many people love to claim that characters like this tend to be whenever they're on screen, regardless of what their role is on screen. They just, I hate being reminded that people like that exist. Grrr, they're being shoved down my throat. Grrr. Why do you watch Star Trek? It's never expressly stated on screen that they're non-binary, at least not in the overtly laboured way that, say, Discovery probably would have handled it, and having a whole scene revolving around it, an explanation thereof, and a discussion about it, and then a counselling session about that. Instead, in this show, the writers give their audience enough credit to just hand us the natural language pieces in dialogue, in normal dialogue, to make it a fairly safe assumption that they're non-binary. Captain Angel, or as we first meet them, Dr Aspen, being solely referred to with non-gendered pronouns throughout. And I'll come back to them in a little bit because they both made and ruined this episode for me. And the events of the episode largely revolve around Spock's perspective, and within which he is also continuing to struggle with the seemingly unalignable duality of his half-human, half-Vulcan existence, trying to figure out what that means for him. So the idea of constructs, of binaries, of dualities, of contradictions is the name of the very, very large and obvious neon sign under whose presumably dual-coloured light this episode was written, probably bisexual lighting. So the framework of the episode runs like this. The Enterprise gets let out of Starfleet space on a trail of some folk who are in trouble. Who they are, what they're doing, none of it actually matters. We get explanations, but who cares? They're just plot devices. Turns out it was all BS anyway, so it double doesn't matter. Captain Angel, undercover as constructed identity Dr Aspen, a counsellor, leads the Enterprise right into a trap without them even knowing it. Bad guys beam on board while the away crew beams onto a ship they think has a bunch of hostages on, and then we get a pretty classic Trek trope of, oh no, the pirates, bad guys / whatever have taken over the Enterprise, or the Kazon Nistrum have taken over Voyager, or the kooky little mini-Borgs are taking over the Enterprise, but not this Enterprise, the other one, with the bald captain, not the captain with perfectly coiffed hair. We'll come back to that as well. Oh, and of course there's only 1 or 2 crew members scrambling around free, sneaking through the Jeffries tubes and hiding around the corners and corridors and things, trying to wrestle back computer control, usually by having to get to engineering, as indeed they do this time. And if you're wondering, by the way, Voyager did this concept best in my opinion. Season 3, Episode 1, Basics Part 2, largely due to Bradford Dourif's heartbreaking performance as Lon Suter. It was just one of the best performances in all of Trek. It was, oh my god. Oh my god, what an episode, and what an actor. But this time around, it's Spock and Doc Aspen narrowly escaping a shootout on the bridge, and separately, Nurse Chapel, who just kind of got lucky and didn't get noticed. Which, by the way, the concept of just not noticing Nurse Chapel, I don't get that. I can't help but notice Nurse Chapel every time she's anywhere close to the camera, because I'm kind of obsessed with her a little bit. Anyway, plot happens and they all wind up in engineering, assuredly enough, seemingly successfully taking command back, removing the computer lockout enacted when the boarding party took over the bridge in the first place, and transferring essential control to the engineering stations. A familiar tune to whistle to many episodes of Star Trek throughout the years, but oh no, there's a twist. Dastardly reveal, Aspen double-crosses them. They're actually Captain Angel, captain of the pirate ship. And they've got a big clever plan to trick the Enterprise into a trap. With a fake rescue mission, they're luring away the captain, who against regulation leads an away team into a hostile situation, taking with him the security chief and a few others, of course. Then having a boarding party come on board the Enterprise with the expectation that they will fail to actually gain control of the ship in the first place, and then tricking Spock into releasing the lockout after having established a rapport with him over presumably the last few days, all in an effort to then use Spock as a bargaining chip who just happens to be engaged to someone who is a criminal rehabilitation worker, a prison guard basically, who just happens to be in charge of another person who Captain Angel wants to trade for Spock and get his freedom. Oh, and of course Spock just so happens to be directly related to this other person, but we're not supposed to know that yet because it's Cyborg. It is convoluted, to say the least, but it's not outside the realm of Star Trekkiness, in fairness. It felt fine as it unfolded, but when you have to explain it all to somebody else, it gets real impractical real fast. But it's stupid and impractical and convoluted in that kind of fun way. You know what I mean? Anyway, underneath all of this is a running subplot of Spock continuing to grapple with his personal duality of humanity versus his Vulcan side. I will never get bored of this, by the way. Just keep doing this. It's something I've spoke about in a few videos already, but for me, I usually read Spock, or I like to read Spock, as an allegory for neurodivergence. In my case, I'm autistic. My brain is wired differently. I process sensory input differently, and my emotional state and my empathic response is significantly heightened compared to human standards. So, especially in this young version of Spock, more inexperienced, still finding coping mechanisms and finding a voice that work for him, I read of him as neurodivergent, not being typical of either human or Vulcan, not really fitting in with the social expectations of either side without tremendous effort on his behalf, or as I know it and other autistic know it, masking is an interesting read to me. I love looking at Spock through that lens, which is why I appreciated Spock's unmaskable reaction and deep and obvious uncomfortability when Pike asked him, or demanded of him, to use his gut instinct to solve a problem early on in the episode. Now, personally speaking, I have a fairly strong intuitive sense, a gut sense, so I don't relate directly to that. But this moment still stands in for oh so many ways in which neurotypicals make demands of my behavior that play directly against everything that I am, so that I can comply to their wants and expectations. It feels exactly like Spock shows it. It's so uncomfortable, it elicits a physical reaction, a cringe, and one so powerful not even Spock could suppress it. This episode, though, uses his duality as a lens for a different kind of divergence from social expectations and normals. It's through the eyes of a gender non-binary character. As his continuing conversations about his own duality go on, and Spock struggles to align with his Vulcan half, the culture in which he was raised and educated, but finding he cannot completely deny his human side either, nor is he finding he even wants to anymore, but he might have once, Dr. Aspen says to him, I urge you to consider that you do not need to be either Vulcan or human. That is, and always has been, a false choice. The question isn't what you are, it's who you are. Exposing Spock, seemingly for the first time in his life, to the idea that the binary of Vulcan or human is not the only possible choice, and is not the only possible truth of what it would mean to be his most authentic version of himself. Maybe he doesn't have to pick a dominant side, a cultural trait. Maybe he doesn't even need to balance them or blend them. Maybe he can just be what he is without compromising along the way. And if you are a gender non-binary person, or have ever simply questioned your relationship to the social constructs of what is a man or what is a woman and what they're expected to act like and be like in your own culture and society, or indeed you've ever had a chance to have a conversation, a real conversation with someone who has gone through that experience. This gesture of perspective from someone with a lived experience is something that rings real strong and real familiar. When someone gives you this kind of permission to start thinking outside of socially constructed binaries, it can be a powerful thing for some people. And of course, what is true of gender identity or Spock's duality can also be true of sexual alignment: straight, gay, bi, pan, queer, ace, all of them. Once the question is asked, or even offered up as an option at all, it can make meaningful perspectives possible for people. It seems simple, but it's an incredibly powerful thing just to open that door and look through it. It's a kind of freedom that most people just didn't even consider they might have until someone showed them that door. So, Dr Aspen is played by guest star Jessie Keitel, herself non-binary, and a quick search did indicate they use she/her pronouns. And her performance as Dr Aspen and as Captain Angel has me feeling rather binary, which, as if I can't stop myself at this point, is more than slightly ironic considering the thematics of this episode. Ta-da! Wordsmith. So, on the one hand, as we first meet them, Dr. Aspen, I found both the character and the performance quite captivating. A gentle, self-confident charisma, but clear of pretension as well. They had a very interesting dynamic with Spock. The easy-flowing dialogue and nuanced and grounded performance made them feel very, very humanized very, very quickly. It was a tremendous work of the writers and the acting and the directing, all working together to make this character just feel real and feel three-dimensional basically instantly. But when the big twist came, which once more, as someone who's watched more than anyone's fair share of sci-fi, I did in fact see coming quite early on the episode, so I was just sitting there waiting for it to happen. It's just the rhythm of such things, and that's fine. I've spoken about that before too. But anyway, with the reveal of their duplicity as the captain of the pirate ship, their dialogue and their performance became just ludicrously cartoonish and stupid. Every line, every ham-fisted smirking line delivery, every pantomimed emotive gesture, and every stage play scene-chewing moment was just distractingly bad. They couldn't even sit in a chair without making it seem laboured and performative and pantomime. And sometimes that really, really works in Trek. It really does. The similarly duplicitous Cisco on Voyager worked just fine as a broadly painted cartoon villain with elaborate plots smirking with their emotional manipulation of the main cast. She too took over the ship in one episode as well. But here, with Angel, and within this episode, in the context of everything else that was going on in this episode, their switch from extremely humanized and sympathetic character to like a Dr. Evil without any of the charm and charisma, it was massively jarring. Keitel seems to be a very good actor, but in this role, I think very badly miscast. They can't play the villain like this. At least they can't play this villain this way with any credulity at all. And frankly, it ruined the final acts of this episode for me. Everything else was riveting, but every single moment of Captain Angel being a mustache-twirling villain of smarmy, "You fell right into my trap, you foolish mortals," kind of bad guy. It just ripped me right out of my suspension of disbelief. I was just like, oh my god, this is just awkward. No, stop. It's such a huge shame, because like I said, I was loving everything else. I'd wish they'd gone a little closer to something like DS9's For the Uniform, one of that show's best episodes, Cisco versus Eddington. Now, Eddington was also kind of a pantomime performative villain, but he was self-aware about it. It sold because the performance was right, and it had that self-awareness. Eddington was the hero of his own story. He didn't think of himself as the bad guy doing bad guy things because evil is fun. And even against Avery Brooks' own wonderfully overplayed scenery-chewing action, it just worked. But Captain Angel, none of that. They were just a ridiculously overacted villain doing villain stuff in wildly and in practically convoluted plans just to stage a jailbreak. It's dumb. It didn't work. But like I said, everything else here, fantastic. The continuing evolution of the Spock and Chapel dynamic is wonderful. And thank goodness the writers chose not to have Chapel be the fawning fop to an oblivious Spock as we saw them in the original series, or let it drag on nebulously forever in the will they, won't they, will they, won't they, will. Instead, They took this opportunity to show that both characters are more than smart enough to not only be self-aware of the mutual affection they're building between one another, but know the other well enough to place it in context. And it is so refreshing to see a love triangle type situation played this way instead of the agonizingly painful way basically every other show ever made insists on playing this trope out. Similarly, Spock and T'Pring keep being way better value on screen than I ever anticipated. T'Pring's continued sensitivity and efforts in her own very, very Vulcan way to understanding who and what and why Spock is, and her efforts to bridge the culture gap between them is wonderful. We don't get a lot of T'Pring on screen, but what we do get is so thick with character, it is remarkable. I can't believe I'm really enjoying T'Pring. A character that could have been, and in fact has been, a really sort of two-dimensional plot device, not an actual character. So I'm loving this. And the B-plot of Pike and the gang hostage on the pirate ship is much like the main plot, kind of classic Trek. Pike starts playing mind games with the acting captain and his crew, sowing the seeds of mutiny, which he then plans to take advantage of to make an escape ploy. It's classic Trek, classic sci-fi, really. It's trope as heck, but just like every other time, almost every other time this show splashes around in tropes, they find ways to make it feel fresh enough to keep it fun and interesting. And like I feel I keep having to remind people, cliches and tropes are different. Cliches are just lazy writing. Tropes are constructs to write within to tell a certain story about a certain type of character and how they react within that structure that we're familiar with, so we can concentrate on the character and not the structure. That's what's going on here as well. Because we see more of how Pike's tactical mind works and how he likes to play things. You imagine Picard or Cisco or even Janeway in this situation, and it will play out very differently if everything else was still identical. That's why I love this kind of playing with tropes. And god damn it, I love Mount's Pike. The balance he strikes in tone and attitude is nothing short of liquid charisma. Oh, and his hair finally loses its structural integrity field. And I mean, last week we see him immediately after boning down with a woman, and it was still strand perfect. So you know it's serious business when his pomp gets flopped. Although he does find time to fix it up a little bit between scenes. Pike's vanity. I'm not sure how to feel about it, but I'm loving it. We also get a little more Ortega strutting in this episode too, as she and Pike keep up their fun little shorthanded pilot metaphors and sort of bonding over little quips. Nothing all that deep, but certainly fun. And it's little moments like this that really show Pike knows his people. He's made an effort to know his people. He has a different way of interacting with each and every one of them. And you can see that Ortega sees that and feels seen by it. Little moments of trust and understanding making the characters feel connected and feel like a crew in a more connected, a more personal way than just the blah, 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 my line, blah, 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 now it's your line to move the plot forward. Okay, here's more plot. Janeway had some of this kind of stuff too. Less pronounced and less broad, perhaps, and usually in more private moments rather than on the bridge, as it often is with Pike. But she also had shifts in how she'd talk with Tuvok or Harry, and perhaps even more pronounced with a lot of the women on the show, B'Elanna and Seven, for example. But it's one of the things I enjoy most about Janeway. She can be insanely dangerously inflexible at times and swings between being a terrific captain and a horrible captain. And that's one of the things to really enjoy about Janeway on screen. But in doing this stuff, she felt much more humanized than the likes of Picard's much more personally restrained style often felt, where he was professional at all costs on the bridge. I'm not sure why that's my Picard voice, but there you have it. But Pike has this humanizing inter-character play on a whole other level. And of course, we cannot move past this discussion without acknowledging Pike's playful, cheesy pirate banter on the bridge after the situation revolves, with Una for some reason refusing to allow Pike to see that she does think it's pretty damn funny, as we all do. We see that play on her face, but turned away from Pike. She refuses to turn around to let him know she thinks it's funny. She refuses to show him, instead demanding that he just stop his cringiness, which kind of a dick move, Una. Let the man have his laugh, you joy vampire. Why wouldn't you want to encourage Pike to be playful? Playful Pike is beautiful. It's glorious. Una. Bastard. This episode's dialogue and character movements in general were especially well done, I thought. Great writing, great directing, and fantastic acting, with the exception of the Captain Angel stuff that I mentioned before, which was just out of place. It's tightly paced without feeling rushed. Nothing ever feels unsaid or overstated. It was just damn good TV. well-made TV and damn good Star Trek, in my personal opinion. And indeed, this episode is an easy contender, I reckon, to be counted among the best this season will offer us. And unlike last week, I think this one will stand up quite strongly against repeated viewings again and again and again and again, and still being fun every time. Sadly, of course, thoughts like that are followed with the realization that this season is only 10 episodes long, so now we only have 3 more episodes to go, and that's a bit of a bummer. But if there is any kindness and justice in the universe, at least 2 of those remaining 3 episodes will be hammer heavy. Do it, you cowards. Give me my smarmy engineer. Anyway, I very much enjoyed this episode, both on a macro level of just the episode being fun in itself, and the sort of meta level where it continually discussed different perspectives of dualities and binaries and what it means to choose a side or not choose a side or play both sides. And I think this episode offers up a lot of useful constructs for people to read in a lot of different interpretations of how things flowed, as indeed, you know, we can look at the gender binary or the sexual preference kind of thing, or neurotypicality and things like that. And I think that's the mark of a good episode. It's not just explaining to you what the writers thought their point was. It's offering you something to then deconstruct. It's what I was talking about with the last episode, a couple of episodes before that, where at the end, it feels like they do a lot of sort of heavy-handed exposition to explain to you what their point was, just in case they felt like you were too stupid to get it. Episodes like this are much better, that they leave it there. It's on a plate for you to taste, or mix with other foods that are on the table and see what combination you come up with on your own. It's a buffet! This metaphor isn't working. Thanks for watching. I'm Plenty. Live long and prosper, and thank you as always to the patrons scrolling up above there. There's a better metaphor here somewhere, I know it, but I'll leave it to you guys.